Welcome to A Tale of Two Scribes. I'm your host, Eric P. Bishop. This is a podcast where interesting people come and tell about the stories they've crafted. As for myself, I'm an author. I've created novels, short stories, novellas, and even poetry. If you'd like to find out more about what I've done, please go to my website, ericpbishop.com. Thanks, and enjoy the journey. Welcome to another episode of A Tale of Two Scribes. Tonight, I am pleased to have Steve Urszenyi on. Hello, Steve.
Hey, Eric, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Like we had talked a couple minutes before this came on, it's been a minute, and a minute
Yeah,
meaning maybe 5 years.
5 years. I know it's crazy how fast that flies by.
Yeah. And that's and I've talked about it on the podcast. That's one of the fun things about doing this and being regular about recording episodes with fellow authors is kind of feel like you get that connection back that you don't necessarily always have every year if you're not going to book events or you're not, you're not connecting or you're just not in the same town at the same time, which is, a rare thing to happen a lot of times.
Or in our case, countries.
Different countries. Although,
Yeah.
I must
Oh,
say, we
we're
kind of think
cousins,
of you as part of the family,
northern neighbors.
northern neighbors. Yes,
Yeah, yeah, happy-go-lucky, beer across the fence kind of neighbors.
absolutely. So no, and I don't know if I told you this I know we've had dinner together before, and that was a while. That might have been 20. No, that was 2019, I think. I think we
2019,
went out
yeah,
to the Palm too, I think.
Palma or whatever it's called, Palma, whatever it's called. Yeah, the Italian.
Yeah, great.
And
Your wife was there.
yeah,
I think there was like four or five of us, maybe.
yeah.
There was a handful of us that went. So, great meal, good time. But it's just kind of great. I don't know. It just brings me back to thinking how crazy it is of how fast that time just kind of trucks along. It's the only thing that keeps the only constant in life basically is that time's going to move.
And the older we get, the faster it goes. So,
It does. And so I have a soon to be 18-year-old and one that just turned 13. My daughter just turned 13 and I keep trying to, as you know, you've got a couple kids, the parental wisdom gets spewed out and I don't know if it's received very well because I sure didn't listen to my parents that much. But I keep trying to tell them, no, you really don't want to be 40 real quick. You want to enjoy being a teenager. You want to enjoy those, make those memories and slow it down as much as you can.
well, I have two, and my oldest, my son, turns 35 in December,
Wow.
and my daughter just turned 32. And one of the neat things is, first of all, as you know, I used to carry photographs, not just not just a wallet size one, but actual photo,
Hmm.
the 4x6 photos in my tactical pant pocket,
Right.
and of my two kids. And I always said, when we talk to friends or
Hmm.
colleagues, I say I love the age, whatever age they were was the best age
Was
they'd ever
this?
been.
Yep.
I never missed when they were 2 or 3 or 10. I just love the age they were in,
Yeah.
and it's the same now. And you learn the cool thing now is sort of by osmosis. It seems they picked up the lessons that
Hmm.
we tried to teach them when they were younger, and
Right.
it's cool now because both my kids. My son sent me a picture over the weekend. He was at a friend's place, and they were shooting a 308 rifle up north in the woods. A
Hmm.
safe target range kind of setup they had on private property. And I thought that's cool. He's learned that and he's adopted the safety, all those safety things about campfires and camping and hiking and shooting or whatever. Just cool to see when the kids grow up. Now we can hang out and have a beer together, but they're
Right.
still my kids and even better, they're good friends too. So it's cool.
Yeah,
Parenting.
that is a neat evolution. So yeah, like I was saying, my son's he'll be 18 in what, 4 months, 3.5, 4 months, not very long. And so and now I'm starting to get that he's starting to really blossom out. So he's been playing music for a few years now, but he's really dug in this last year in bluegrass.
Cool.
And yeah, it's really cool. It's fun thing, and he's getting really good at it really quickly. Obviously, like with us with writing, it's not something that you just go, I'll pick this up every now and then and I'll get really good at it. No, it is a craft. It's
Yeah.
something you have to hone.
Yeah.
So he's constantly going to music events. So I have custody now for years now since I saw you last. So I only see the kids half the month anyways. In this last month, the 2 weekends that should have been my time with him or time to spend time together, he was gone on bluegrass events. So So that was a
Yeah.
little bittersweet because out of like a month, I had him like 2 nights, and I was just like,
Yeah.
this isn't cool. I don't know if I like this or not.
Yeah.
Sure, you want to play
Yeah. And that's
bluegrass?
hard. Yeah, that's hard. Losing him to bluegrass, that's hard.
But I think if I'm going to lose him to something, that's a pretty good thing to lose him to. So
Yeah, for sure.
Um, but on the flip side of that though is just to see them develop into their being becoming adults.
Yeah.
It's pretty special, and you have to look at like you said. There's no like each age you have them has their own great moments, and you have to focus on that. You can't wish away of I just can't wait till they're old enough to have a beer with, or old enough to drive, or old enough to potty trained or whatever. It's like as hard as it is in life, try to enjoy those moments as they're going by because, like we just said, they're going by, and at the end, you're not going to go, "Geez, I'm done. I'm done. I
Yeah.
don't want another 5 minutes." No, I think you'll be like, "I'll take 5 more minutes with my kids or my wife or whoever, your loved ones."
I think there was about a year where our daughter Megan went through a stage we wished something. And it was that, she'd get over that period she was in, and she did. Like there was a year there. It's kind of funny, just a quick story.
Mhm.
My wife was going through, I guess my daughter was home visiting actually. She found her own journal that she
Okay.
had kept when she was a teenager, 14, 15, 16, in
Mhm.
that age group, in age range. And she called my wife called Lynn in, Lynn. So she called Lynn in the room and said, Mom, look at this. And she's flipping through pages, and there were like 4 or 5 pages on every line. It was like a Bugs Bunny cartoon. I hate my parents. I hate my parents. I hate my parents. I hate my parents. I hate my 4 or 5 pages.
Wow.
We have no idea what we did wrong. She actually had no recollection of why she wrote that, but it just, stuff happens. You got to take the bad with the good, and fortunately, most of the time, it's good. So, and it's great now.
Yeah. Well, she
So,
grew out of it, so fortunately.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Well, and speaking of the bad with the good, it's definitely something I want to segue into in a couple minutes. Is you're not my first episode since the hurricane, but I did try to film an episode maybe the week after the hurricane struck Western North Carolina. I didn't have internet, so I was jumping off my cell phone. Which here I
Mhm.
learned a good lesson here. When Verizon tells you you have unlimited data, not necessarily true. You
Yeah,
you don't have unlimited high speed data. You might have unlimited data, but they might throttle that down
yeah,
to worse than dial up. Um,
yeah,
so that's what happened. I tried to film an episode and it was very choppy. We had a bunch of issues, and I just said, okay, until the cable comes back online, I'm retired from or filming new podcast episodes.
yeah. Makes sense.
Well, that took 4 weeks. I still don't have cable internet. My cable internet modem's over here that you can't see off screen. It's still blinking blue. It doesn't work. I had to go get Starlink so I could
Yeah,
do my job and do everything. And Elon's got Elon's one of those controversial figures in life. I will say, good on Starlink though. It seems to work really good. So, hey, um,
well,
but
good that you're up online.
yeah, well, obviously, I'm sure you saw some of the news. I know the national news and global news up in Canada that Western North Carolina really got just hammered in spots. We were fortunate where I was. We lost power for a couple days. Obviously, my internet went down, still down. Scheme of things,
Yeah,
inconvenience, but I found a workaround and it's okay. But yeah, like 30, 40 minutes from where I live here, entire towns are, part of them decimated, part of them gone. Places that like I think the storm hit on a Thursday night, Friday morning. I was actually up in Grandfather Mountain. A friend of mine turned 50. And so to
been there.
celebrate, we went to a new place we had neither one of us had gone. We went up to Grandfather Mountain and did some hiking. We talked about it a couple weeks ago. We said, some of those little towns we drove through were in valleys. They're probably not little towns anymore,
Yeah,
just because of the
yeah,
flooding and the devastation. So I ended up volunteering the week after the storm. Local equestrian center here kind of became a hub for receiving donations and giving donations out. So I had my kids there this weekend for a regular event they were holding, and I was kind of telling my daughter, right where we're walking, there was two lines that were, I don't know, 30, 40 cars deep of people just trying to get supplies.
yeah, yeah,
And then I worked on the next line over, which was just receiving supplies. And that second day I was there, It was a bless. It was amazing to see the outpouring. People were pulling up in U-Hauls or box trucks, just saying, "Hey, we drove 4 or 5 hours just to give the community stuff."
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was. I think so often we see the worst in humanity, and it's great to get that reminder every now and then of, we're all not very different. There's only some slight differences a lot of times, but the outpouring of care for one another during a hardship. And that's where I want to go with your career, basically, because you've kind of lived that background where dealing on the paramedic side and seeing people, that were really in need. That was your livelihood and how you helped people for so many years. So talk about that. Talk about what got you into that field, and then maybe we can talk about how that kind of then influenced your writing.
I mean, yeah, I think I stumbled into it in a way. When I was really young, and I'm talking 9, 10 years old, I really wanted to be a police officer.
Hmm.
And up until a few years ago, I had surgery to correct my vision. I had really bad eyesight, awful, awful eyesight. So I applied to the police. I knew I would never make it because of the vision standard. I wore glasses. They were quite thick before I had surgery,
Hmm.
15 years ago. So policing was off the table.
Okay.
And that wasn't so disappointing, really, because I kind of knew somewhat older than 9 or 10 years old, I figured out I'd probably never be a cop.
Hmm.
But I was always drawn to helping people, and partly because I went into lifeguarding because I fell in love with a lifeguard, and she thought she was really hot, and the only way to impress her was to try to swim like a cool guy and become a lifeguard like her. So,
Women,
uh,
I tell you. Ugh.
women, yeah. So I became a lifeguard, and I found the first aid side, the medical side, the
Hmm.
treatment side. I found interesting, and then I got into what were called lifeguard competitions, where you form up on these lifeguard teams. So I
Okay.
worked for what was called the Borough of Etobicoke, which is like it's like saying the Borough of Queens or the Borough of Manhattan or a borough of, the Bronx or whatever.
Hmm.
It was a suburb of Toronto
Okay.
before Toronto was fully amalgamated. And we used to go around the province of Ontario competing against other lifeguard teams.
Hmm.
And I really enjoyed that competition level. And that was a lot of that was to do with first aid and responding to
Right.
crisis situations. So someone would be drowning in the pool, you'd respond, react, deal with a situation, on to the next call.
Hmm.
And I found I really had an affinity for doing it
Hmm.
and for eating up the adrenaline rush of it,
Yeah.
and didn't think much of it. Ended up going off to university. I was in the physical and health education program at University of Toronto. And in my first year, I'd be talking to third and fourth. So we would do a full academic course load,
Okay.
but we would also, in first year and subsequent years, you would also do 3 or 4 activity credits. So you have to do
Hmm.
coaching level in ice hockey, gymnastics, track and field, swimming, competitive swimming. So I was taking those activities. So it's a major academic course load plus your activity course load.
Okay.
And the activities you were mixed in with second, third, and fourth year students.
Hmm.
And I always ask this third and fourth year students, you know, in the locker room before you go on or after you come off the hockey rink, what are you doing next year? What are you doing when you finish your
Hmm.
degree? And they all said teaching. And while I
Hmm.
liked teaching and instructing, and as part of being a lifeguard, I was an instructor as well.
Right.
I didn't picture myself teaching high school or teaching phys ed, or
Right.
I just didn't want to go there. Well, in the meantime, I had a buddy of mine who was in a college program for the paramedic program.
Okay.
And I told him that I really was interested in that program. He says, come on up to the college for a day.
Hmm.
So I did. So I did a day. I hung around with him for a day in the paramedic program and fell in love with the program.
Hmm.
And that was the side of I then applied to the program. I actually got waitlisted because I was a late applicant, but managed to get into the program, and that was that. And so it was all about enjoying the side of being able to help people. And it's kind of
Hmm.
corny, but that's the way it was. That's what got me into it. It
No.
was a field that interested me because of the adrenaline,
Yeah.
and it wasn't super cool at the time. It was cool when you watched the TV show Emergency.
Hmm.
But the profession of being a paramedic, in fact, Toronto at the time didn't have, quote unquote paramedics. We were doing all the fancy stuff. We were still pretty much ambulance attendants,
Hmm.
emergency medical technicians, whatever you want to call it. So it wasn't sexy that I was getting into, but it was a job. It was cool. There was an adrenaline rush attached to it, and I really enjoyed the helping people side.
Yeah.
My first ride along as a student, my very first time on an ambulance working with, like riding along, literally not knowing anything yet.
Hmm.
As part of the college program, though, you do 400 ride along hours back
Wow.
then.
Okay.
So my first shift, first call was a terrorist bombing. And it was a group called the Squamish Five Direct Action
This is how we're going to tie to writing later.
that bombed the Litton Systems plant. So Litton Systems in Toronto at the time, they had a number of plants, and they made the guidance system for the cruise missile, the American cruise missile.
Yeah.
But the guidance system was made up here in Canada, in Toronto. And this group who stuck to previously blowing up porn shops and construction sites. They stole a bunch of dynamite, drove across the country, put a 1,000-pound bomb inside a van outside Litton Systems, blew it up. And that was my very first call, taking care of those people and standing by really for the rest of the night as
Hmm.
they looked for more victims under the building and whatnot. But that was kind of my career got off to a start with a bang, or however
Yep.
you say that. But
Think
so
so.
that was my intro to that side of things. And that actually triggered, if you want, again, no pun intended, but bad pun given. I'd always had terrorism was a side study of mine. So,
Hmm.
um, you know, probably the Lockerbie bombing,
Yeah.
Pan Am 103 over
103. Yep.
Lockerbie, that was probably the first true large scale terrorist event where I sort of began more of an academic
Hmm.
study of terrorism, and that
Right.
continued through my life. And that pushed me forward into other areas of study, which eventually got me into the arena of chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosives incident response,
Hmm.
as well as the heavy urban search and rescue side of things. So that's kind of how that progressed over the years.
So talk about that for a second. So when you get into that type of when you're that specific in the with the nuclear and all that stuff,
Yeah.
are you still 9 to 5, or, whatever hours? Are you still a regular paramedic and doing that as well, or is that a transition where you're actually just doing a completely different, career
It's
choice?
mostly still a 9 to 5. So the way it worked for me, in the late 90s, I did a FEMA course actually by correspondence
Okay.
because Canada didn't yet have a CBRNE program.
Okay.
But FEMA had their version, which at the time might have been Be Nice, like biological, nuclear, incendiary, chemical, and explosive. They had all kinds of acronyms before the world
Mhm.
settled on CBRNE or CBRNE or CBRN, whatever you want to call it. There's some regional differences, and the Army calls it CBRNE. And so,
Okay.
whatever it is, it's the same study. But I did a FEMA course long before I was ever part of a curriculum you could take up here, or for the
Wow.
most part, anywhere in North America.
Hmm.
And that got me interested. And then I wrote a proposal for our department. I wrote a letter to our chief, and the chief asked me to write a proposal
Hmm.
to put forward to city council on forming the first HUSAR team in the area. So a heavy urban search and rescue team, similar to the US, the Task Force 1 and 2
Okay.
FEMA teams of each state. So
Okay.
Virginia Task Force 1, Florida Task Force 2, all these task force teams, which are a combination of capabilities, but on a urban search and rescue team. So if a building
Hmm.
collapse, you've got engineers who can do the shoring, you've got firefighters who can do a lot of the work of extrication and air testing air quality and
Right.
looking for explosives in there. You got the police who do the investigations, you got the medics who do the medical stuff, um, et cetera. You come together in this one interdisciplinary team called a USAR or HUSAR, either urban search and rescue or heavy urban search and rescue team.
Hmm.
So
Let me
I
let
put
me
it,
cut you off real quick on there. So with those teams, just for curiosity, because I'm not super familiar with them, so do they probably keep a standard regular job and then they're activated
yes,
during the
that's
time of
correct.
national? Okay, gotcha.
Exactly that. And they get, in the case of the states, they get, I believe they come, now my information might be outdated, but it used to be that they'd be called up and become federalized employees
Okay,
while they're activated. And
gotcha.
then they would do their stuff. They're provided with workers' compensation in case something bad happens.
Hmm.
They're paid, their departments are compensated for their absence or whatever.
Right.
So that's how it works. And it's a very large integrated system between local, state, and federal, or in our case, local, provincial, and federal
Hmm.
governments to fund and support. So in my case, fast forward a few years, I didn't take part in any of I worked for Toronto Paramedic Services,
Okay.
but everything to do with Toronto Paramedic Services that were in the special operations arenas was too far, too long of a commute, and I didn't want to do it. So a number of years later, the Ontario Provincial Police, which is like the state police in the province of Ontario,
Okay.
they had their tactical team. So they had a CBRNE and HUSAR team combined, and they had three tactical teams or SWAT teams,
Hmm.
plus a public order unit, riot squad, plus some other capability special operations teams. Well, they wanted to finally bring on some medics to
Okay.
support those operations because when you're going province wide, you don't know from one area to the other what level of care you're going to get, whether you're going to get EMT level care, or in our case, what we call primary care,
Right.
or to get EMT3 or paramedic level care, which is here called advanced care paramedic level.
Okay.
So to make it consistent for the police officers, they brought on a group of medics, 16 of us initially,
Hmm.
to support those operations. And so I was part of that program. And that went from being a combination of SWAT medic to then I took some additional training through the federal government here
Hmm.
in CBRNE, so I could act eventually I became an advanced CBRNE responder, which
Okay.
is responding to full hazmat suits,
Hmm.
practicing with live agents, so live chemical agents like nerve agents, things like that, live radioactive stuff
Hmm.
down in the hot zone, how to decon that stuff, decontaminate
Yeah.
that stuff. So I did all that stuff and became a responder. So in my case, I was I would be called in by the OPP. I was on a pager system.
Okay.
So every month I would give them however many days, 20 days of availability. And when I was off my regular shift, OPP would call me up if I was on call and something went on. They would page me out and I'd go out and
You
respond
go
with
up.
them
Hmm.
anywhere in the province of Ontario.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. But we also did things like the North American Leadership Summit, where the three presidents, so it was Obama, Stephen Harper, and Fox from Mexico, all met up here.
Okay.
So like any big security
Hmm.
event, which three presidents or two presidents and a prime minister meeting, that's a pretty big event. So we supported
Yeah.
events like that, or
Okay.
the G8, G20 events. We supported the G8, G20 as part of the public order unit, as well as CBRNE. So lots of fun, lots of diversity in my work history. So
When you were talking about some of that, I was thinking again back to the storm here. About a week within the first week of the storm hitting, where my local Costco is, which is about 30 minutes away. There's a mall next to it, and I think, and you could never really, they didn't have signs up that said we are FEMA or we're federal or incident response, but literally they created a village in this mall parking lot. It took over the entire parking lot. Like first time I drove by it, there was semis pulling in and they were starting to put a tent up. And I went by the next day for some reason, and the tent was fully up. And it was one of those ones that like the circus would use. I mean, just except it was white, but it was massive. Had sides. They had pulled in bathrooms by then. There was just line of vehicles that were bathrooms. There was campers, and it was just it created this whole village, and I believe it was the staging point for then getting responders out into Western North Carolina to, to where they needed the help.
yeah,
So, but
yeah, and that's a tall order. My last job, before I retired to write full time,
mhm.
I was the commander of the province of Ontario's disaster response team, medical disaster response team. So I had 160 um, doctors, nurse practitioners, nurses, paramedics,
Mhm.
firefighters under me, and we would be deployed. We would train for anything, all hazards,
Yeah.
including natural disasters, but also we were specifically deployed or mandated to respond to and support nuclear plant disasters and
Hmm.
radioactive spills and things like that. So we had a full field hospital like you're describing, but a full field hospital set up.
Okay.
And we were profiled on some morning shows when we deployed out to Ottawa for different
Hmm.
events or whatever. But yeah, I can tell you the logistics involved in that level of support and planning and operations, it's huge.
Yeah.
And it becomes a big, I mean, I had an annual budget, but when I went on deployment, I had to put it, so they would say the, cabinet minister or the health minister would call and say we need to deploy EMAT.
Hmm.
We need a concept of operations and a budget by noon. It's like, okay. So you literally have to kind of guess what you might be doing based on what
Right.
little you knew about a particular event.
Yeah.
And quite often, the budget for an event I was responding to that might take a few days or might be 2 or 3 weeks was double or triple my annual budget with a team of 200 people.
Hmm.
So really pricey but necessary expenditures
Yeah.
to help mitigate the effects of, terrible events like natural disasters. And up here, luckily, we don't get a lot of hurricanes, but
Right.
we have had tornadoes. Again, not as bad as some of your, the Midwest,
The
I guess, and the
Tornado
plain,
Alley. Yeah.
yeah,
Oklahoma
Oklahoma,
and up through
and
Kansas.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we have had quite a few. I've responded to 5 tornadoes up here by myself as a paramedic.
Hmm.
So, but anyway, yeah, interesting stuff planning, but terrible stuff from
I,
the.
I've seen one in person. So I was living out in Colorado, early 2000s, and regular day we were down the tech center south of Denver, and alarm went off in the building. We thought it was fire alarm. I had only lived in the state, I don't know, 6 months, if even that long. And so someone like grabbed me, they're like, "Hey, we need to head down to the basement. It's a tornado warning." And I was like, "A tornado warning, really?" And so, of course, we immediately ran to the window and looked out, like, "Ooh, can we see something?" And I think we were like 16, 18 floors, somewhere under the 20 floor. And it was a big building. But sure enough, you looked out and it was, probably 20, 25 miles away. It was far, but you could see it and you would watch in the path. And then they're just, finally they're like, "No, we really got to go downstairs." And so
Yeah,
brought us down the basement. But it was one of those moments where you see it and I've seen them on TV. I've seen live video, live images of them. And of course, then you've seen the movie Twister and all the stuff Hollywood does with that kind of stuff. But it was surreal. It was surreal to watch it and go, "Is that real? Is that really going across the plains?" And it didn't end up damaging where we were.
yeah,
I think we sat down there for an hour, and finally people were like, "Screw this! I'm going home. I'm not, I'm not going to sit around all day." And about an hour later, they're like, "Oh, you can go back to work. We're safe now." But it was strange to see, and
yeah.
I'm glad we don't often have them here in Western North Carolina because, no, I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, I'm the same. I mean, where we live here in Canada, we're in a fairly temperate zone, so
Hmm.
Toronto is not a super cold, super snowy area.
Yeah,
But you get tired of winter. I'm a Harley rider. I like to
that was
hop on the bike and go.
right.
And come mid-March, I'm still chomping at the bit, and mid-April, I'm going a little crazy, waiting for the ice and snow to be gone. Um,
You're
so
just
that's the
sitting in the
difference.
garage revving it, going, "Ah, I gotta
Yeah,
gotta get it
I got to
out."
hear those pipes. Yeah. The trade-off, though, is, um, one of the reasons we're happy we're here is because we don't have the hurricanes and tornadoes and
Right.
earthquakes and floods and knock on wood, right? Other
Yeah.
natural disasters that so many other areas of North America and the world are prone to.
Yeah.
So I'll take the odd ice storm that knocks out power for a day or two, but all in all, we're pretty lucky.
I was in Yosemite last week. I haven't even been home a week from my last trip out to my sixth trip to Yosemite, and the place I went this time, some of it was the same, but one spot I hadn't been to before, and I was there a year ago with my family, and part of that spot had been hit by a forest fire, and they said it was intentionally started.
Mm.
And I've seen a lot of them over the years there. I've actually been out there during the fires and seen the smoke, seen them fighting at Yosemite. So it's pretty amazing thing to watch. But just looking out over the mountain ranges and seeing just charred trees as
Yeah,
far as you can see.
yeah,
Yeah, it's difficult to see. And then out there, you're also forest fires and also you deal with earthquakes.
yeah.
And I was out there for 94 during the North. I wasn't there during the Northridge. I was there, I think, a month to the day after. And I
Mm.
was out in Palm Springs. I was a senior in high school. I was staying in a condo with my grandmother who was out there for the winter. And I was just like laying on the ground or in the living room one evening watching something. And I thought it was a plane flying overhead. And I was just like, "Oh, that was odd. What was that?" And I'm like, "I don't think we're near the airport." Went about my business and the news came on at 11 o'clock. Breaks with the story of, "Hey, those of you in, Palm Springs area probably felt the aftershock, the 4.2 aftershock from Northridge." And I was just like, when does my flight get the hell out of here?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, earthquake is not something I want to experience firsthand. So,
Can't plan for those. So
no.
So, okay, you've had this career, and when did this career, during this career, is that when you said, I've experienced some stuff and I've got this writing itch I need to fulfill? When did that kick in for you?
I've always been a writer. Writing is something I always enjoy doing. I mean, I'm one of those obnoxious people who used to write as a child. And I actually
Mhm.
have somewhere on my shelf behind me, I have a novel I started when I was like 10 or 11, and
Love it.
it was called Ocean Trek. So it was a ripoff of Star Trek, and there was another underwater based show at the time, but it was called Ocean Trek. And in my
Mhm.
story, it envisioned a world where Canadians will hate me and Americans might not like me either, but at the time I called it United North America. So Canada and the US had merged into one big happy country. And there was this fleet of submarines going through the ocean because, of course, still keeping the peace.
Mhm.
And they come across a giant squid. So anyway, that's my 10-year-old story. I got a bunch of pages into it and then stopped. But so I'm someone who enjoyed writing from the time I was a
Yeah.
kid, but I would just dabble. And there was a period of time where I stopped writing.
Hmm.
In high school, I wrote some bad poetry, that kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly. And
Yep.
then in my early adulthood, or when I guess it was earlier, it was in my 30s probably when the kids were young,
Hmm.
I started, again, the bug snuck up on me and said, you should try to write a novel. And I did try to write a novel. I got like 70 pages into it,
Okay.
hit a wall because I'm a pantser. I don't plot. So I hit a wall.
Hmm.
And when I tried to figure out how to get myself out of the writing corner I had backed myself into, there weren't any resources at the time
Mm.
on the internet to help you do that. And the only
Right.
books I found basically said, well, if you're not outlining, you're not writing. And I thought, well, I'm busy enough as it is,
Yeah.
working 12-hour shifts and
Right.
raising a family. I quit. So I stopped writing.
Okay.
Fast forward 10 years, and I got interested in a TV show called Flashpoint. It was a police drama set up. It was shot up here, filmed and created up here by some people I know. Well, I got to know them, and I know them now, but
Hmm.
at the time they were strangers. But the concept of the show revolved around this tactical team. They never said it was Toronto, but they never said it was anywhere else either.
Okay.
Um, and I really liked the idea of this tactical team, but they didn't have a tactical medic on the team. So, and I thought, well, every tactical team these days has a medic. Long story
Hmm.
short, I talked to the showrunners, pitched them the idea of a tactical medic. They, for dramatic purposes, chose not to do that, which I understand because they didn't want to. If they had a medic right there to take care of the officer when he goes down right away, where's the tension?
Right.
So they made a dramatic choice, and it was a good one. But then at the same time, I expressed when I was in the writers' room for like 90 minutes talking to these writers. I guess I led on that I was a closet writer. I enjoyed writing
Hmm.
and told them why I stopped. And they basically said, Steve, if you want to write, just write.
Right. Yeah.
And that's when the penny dropped. That was
Gotcha.
around 2010 or so.
Okay.
And I started to pick it up again in earnest and try to write stories. So
Hmm.
I would start bringing my laptop to work with me. We'd be on a standby somewhere parked on a corner in the
Yep.
ambulance. I'd have my laptop, I'd be writing. And at the time I was writing screenplays. So I was
Okay.
dabbling in screenplay writing. And then eventually I had a screenplay story that I liked, but as I was like 30 pages into a screenplay, which is about a quarter of the way through a feature length film,
Hmm.
by the numbers in screenwriting, I realized I really liked the story. I liked the story, but I wanted to see it as a novel. I wanted to write it as
Yeah.
a novel.
Gotcha.
And so I changed the beginning. I changed it over into the very first Alex Martel story,
Okay.
which is what took me 4 years to finish. And
Right.
I eventually came to Thriller Fest with
Yep.
as my first finished manuscript. And that all stemmed from someone just saying to me, if you
Hmm.
want to write, just write. And then me going, why didn't I think of that? And
Right.
then doing that every chance I got thereafter. Although I still kind of did it more like a hobby. I would do it some evenings, but not real religiously.
Hmm.
Sometimes in the weekend, but not real religiously. And then 3 years into that, I had half a full manuscript done.
Hmm.
And I kind of liked where it was going. And I told that to Lynn, to my wife, Lynn.
Hmm.
And then I stumbled on at the ITW and Thriller Fest
Right.
and Pitch Fest. And I went, oh. And the light went on. I thought, well, if I finish my manuscript, I can pitch an agent. I can't pitch an agent without a full manuscript. I
Hmm.
have 6 months. I'm going to finish this manuscript that I've been working on for three and a half years, but I'm going
Right.
to finish it by golly. And that's what I did. And that was the beginning really of my serious foray into writing.
In what year? Because I think I first met you in 2017. I think I met you the first year.
No, you were there 2017. I wasn't. I would
You
have
were
met you
18?
my
18.
18 was my first year.
Okay. Because we were on the security team together, I think, in
Yeah.
18.
Yeah.
Because Simone,
Or
Simon,
19.
kind of
We were on the security team in 19.
19. Okay. Oh, I did
18 was
18.
my you
Okay.
did.
Okay.
18 was my first year at Thriller Fest. 19 I was on the security team. But yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And
Yeah.
what year
So
did you pitch in 2018 for the first time?
18 I pitched in 28 I
Okay.
pitched in 2018 for the first time and crashed and burned. Pitched like I mean, it was good because it's good experience.
Yes.
And I got to meet some great writers. I mean,
Right.
Brian Andrews, Jeffrey Wilson giving me pointers
Yeah.
on how to pitch better, how to refine my pitch. Ed Amar, um, Kathleen Antrim, all kinds of people, Simon Gervais, trying to
Hmm.
help me refine my pitch. So I got to meet good people and figure
Yeah.
out what I was doing wrong in a pitch.
Right.
And then I pitched, and they loved it, but the agent saw it, but knew that I had. Well, I'll be honest with you. The thing I had about my manuscript was it was a Canadian character.
Hmm.
And it was a conscious choice when I was writing it. Do I make it a Canadian character, which I know agents and publishers will later say, well, who's going to care about a Canadian character like that? And in some
Canadians.
place, yeah, well, no, they don't. It
No,
works.
they don't.
If you're Louise Penny writing about Armand Gamache, Inspector Gamache in Quebec, it works because
Right.
that's just different.
Yeah.
But in the area of espionage or military espionage thrillers, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I
No, you're right.
understood that, and I get it. Canada's a nice place. There's no bad people up here, et cetera. So,
We got
we're
them all down here. You guys, everyone ships them here, I think.
yeah. I mean, the reality is, and I don't, America is they want to know the bad people, what's going to happen to America. They don't care what's going to happen to Canada, and I don't blame them, right?
Right.
It's your condition to look after number one, look out for number one, and so an international Canada, I mean, we get neglected, and I'm okay with that. We get neglected because we're not really international like Europe is. We're
Right.
not domestic in the States, so we're still foreigners and foreign nationals and all that. So we're in that funny, kissing cousins kind of scenario all the time. Um, but it took me 6 months to revise the story into a good
Okay.
American character backstory that would work. And it took me 6 months. And then I pitched the next year to one agent only. I only pitched one agent because that's the agent I wanted. And man, was I lucky that John Talbot, my current agent, said yes.
That's
And
amazing.
yeah, so it worked for me. I don't I don't recommend that as a pitching style at Pitch Fest. You can waste a whole year doing it that way,
Yep.
but it worked for me. So I'm very happy about that.
So I pitched to John in 2017 for a different novel, not The Body Man. And then in 2018, um, I don't think I pitched to John, but what I did was I met John at one of Brad Taylor's events down in
Yeah,
Charleston.
yeah,
And I was just in there talking to Brad, and he's like, "Oh, because I had talked to Brad for like 2 years straight at Thriller Fest, and he's like, "Oh, here's my agent. There's John Talbot." So I started talking to, oh, John Talbot. So,
yeah,
and I spent about an hour, probably annoying the hell out of him, but I spent about an hour. I mean, he was asking me questions. He's like, and I was kind of going in the concept behind the body man and stuff. And so at some point, I thought I had him, or I knew I had him at least interested, because he said, "So how did you figure all this stuff out? How did you, what's your connection in with the Secret Service and all that?" And I was just like, "John, I made all this shit up, man. I'm a storyteller." And he's like, "Okay, well, this is really convincing." I was like, "Well, thank you." Um, and so I think at the end of the night, actually, Brad was going to drop him off at his hotel, and I was leaving to go back out of town. I had about a 3 hour drive home. I didn't want to spend the night, so I was going to be a late night. So I said, "Hey, I'm getting on the highway. Where's your hotel?" And John's hotel was literally like a mile down the road. "I'll drop you off." So I dropped him off, and he said, "Oh, send me your manuscript." Perfect. So I got home, told my wife at the time what was going on. Well, sure enough, that week I sent the manuscript, and I thought, this is it. This is it. Everything happened because that was lined up how it should have been.
yeah,
And 2 weeks later, he passed. And I was
yeah,
like,
yeah,
but that's not something that's a negative story to me, because the building blocks and the steps an author takes to get published or to get their foot in the door, there's no set pattern. There's
Yeah, no,
no, you can't go, well, look how Steve made it. I'm going to make it
yeah,
the same way. No, you might, but you also, if you follow Steve's example, it might not be the right way for you and you fall flat on your face. So, I try to always tell people just be yourself. And the only thing about this crazy publishing world that you need to have is consistency. You have to keep putting in the work, keep putting it out there, realize that a lot of people are going to tell you no.
yeah,
And what Brad Meltzer told me years ago when I met with him is don't let anyone tell you no. And it's literally a signed thing from Brad that's on my wall that I look at every day, even if I don't
yeah,
notice it every day, it's there. But
yeah.
it's that reminder when I need it where I'm so frustrated about something. I'm like, no, okay. Do I believe in what I'm doing? Okay, well then how do I make it happen? How do I get it published? How do I, if I'm having a mental block with something, that's my way of saying, okay, don't listen to the naysayers, find a way to make it work.
Yeah, and Simon Gervais did much the same for me that Brad Meltzer did for you.
Yeah.
Um, he read my first manuscript, which is called By a Long Shot, first Alex
Mhm.
Martel story, and he loved it. And he offered to connect me with his agent, and we did. We
Mhm.
connected. Didn't go much further than that.
And
Same as you.
another Eric, by the way, Eric Myers, I think, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah, Eric Myers.
Yeah.
And the deal is what Simon kept saying to me is, I mean, there's so many cliches in publishing, but they're there for a reason. It's not a marathon. It's not a sprint. Sorry, it's not a marathon. Phew. It's not a sprint. It's a
It's a
marathon.
marathon. Correct. Yeah.
It's about being persistent and
Yep.
consistent and all those things. It's about resilience.
Right.
And it's not about, as you said, it's not about trying to model your path after somebody else's, because
No.
even an agent who took on somebody, agent A takes on writer B. Well, he's not necessarily going to look for the same thing in writer C.
Right.
So there's just no way to know which direction to go. The only control you have is over your desire to
Hmm.
write and your desire to become a better writer.
Yep.
And if you're working on your craft, which just by the act of writing, you're working on your craft.
Hmm.
So if you're working on your craft, you're writing, you're doing a little reading and researching and learning about your craft on the side. You're talking to people, networking, socializing, learning from
Hmm.
them, learning the industry, which is also important.
Yeah.
Eventually good things will happen
Right.
with the persistence. And those are big lessons for anybody getting started, no
Hmm.
matter how early or late in life they're trying to do it.
Yeah. Well, and I've said this on other podcasts, but I try to, I end up repeating the same things, but I don't know who's going to listen and which episode people will catch, but I try to just tell people and remind people of like, it is a long game. So if you're interested, and whether it's a musician, an artist, a painter, a writer, if it's something you really enjoy, first of all, make sure that's the case. Make sure you really enjoy it. And if you really
Yeah.
enjoy it, well, then pursue it. And like for my story, and I've mentioned this before, is when I wrote my first novel in 2014, I didn't have that much excess free time. So when was I going to write? Well, I wasn't going to let it interfere with my family. My kids were really little at the time. So the one thing I did was I cut out television. And there was a period of time there where I watched very little TV. And, I was just, like I said, in Yosemite this last week with my boss, my coworker, and we were out dinner and we were hiking together. And my boss would mention a movie. Well, surely you've seen this movie. And if it was a movie that came out like in the last 10 years, maybe I saw it. But there's a
Yeah.
high probability I'm like, yeah, no, I didn't catch that. He's like, I told you to watch that a couple years ago. And I was like, you know how many books I've written the last couple years and novellas and short stories, and now I'm running my own book imprint. I'm like, time is one thing, and I love it, so it's not a complaint. But watching something's a luxury, and also I don't know if you found this or not. Now that I'm actually deep into that creative craft, watching stuff now sometimes annoys me because the writing is so weak. I'm like, how did that get on television? This is horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And it's a trap you can fall into because it did get there, but and who knows what happens if your stuff and my stuff gets there, what happens to it in the process, because
Right.
they're not taking our stuff, which of course is gold to us,
Yes.
but someone has to adapt it.
Yep.
And adaptation is really about interpretation. And
Right.
so it's up to whoever makes it to decide how it's going to get made.
Yep.
So maybe it started out as gold and then, through various, who knows, maybe the executives sent too many notes and that's what really happened to it. The writers were great, but the they kept getting these ridiculous notes that said that if you don't do it this way, we're going to pull the budget or whatever. Who knows? It
Right.
just, all we can do is keep on writing and hope that maybe we get there sometime if that's what
Yeah.
our aspirations are. And I got to admit, that's one of my dreams is
Sure.
to see things made into a Hollywood blockbuster or a good series or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and that's really it's almost like the Alcoholics Anonymous credo. It's like,
Hmm.
worry about the things you can change.
Right.
Anything else, leave it alone. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And I try to preach that to different people I know who I wish they would listen to me when I say it. But, it's like, guys, just focus on what you can change.
Yeah. Well, and I
And you
think
really, as a writer, it's something you really have to adopt because
mhm,
publishing, whether you're publishing your own imprint or self-publishing or traditionally published,
mhm,
there's a million things beyond our control
right.
and only so many things we can control. And it comes back to the writing.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just going to say that. I would say the thing that we as writers can control is we can craft the best story possible. And that's what I always tell people. That's your job.
Yeah.
Yes, you need to market. Yes, if you're, or you're going to market even if you're with a big publisher. If you're going
Yeah.
to self-publish or do an indie press, you're most certainly, you are the marketer or you're hiring out
Yeah.
whatever your financial abilities are. But the number one thing that you can't get wrong is you have to write a good story. And if you don't, I know some people that have said, well, I got a really good cover. It's like, well, good. You get one chance to have a good cover. If the inside of that cover is crap, that'll be the last time someone's going to give you a chance.
Yeah.
The reverse is you could have a lousy cover and a great story, and no one's going to see it because they look at the cover and they're like, what did a kindergartner draw this with crayons? This is horrible. So
Yeah.
you've got to find a good balance there, but ultimately it's that story. Because also, if the story is really good and maybe the cover's not so good, there's going to be word of mouth that says, blah, blah, blah person. That's a really solid story.
Yeah.
Well, they start posting those, and, we're in this world of we want to see reviews. We need reviews on Amazon, on Goodreads. And man, when you start getting those solid reviews, those just feed the fire.
Yeah, and there's no accounting for what a reader's going to like, and
Right.
you can't. I mean, obviously, you can't chase trends, you can't chase markets. You just have to write something that you're passionate about writing for whatever reason.
Yeah.
If it's something, again, I'm a pantser, so I don't start with, well, now as I'm writing a series and I'm finishing the third book in the series, you're a little less of a pantser because you kind of
Modified
have to have,
pantsing.
yeah, exactly. You bit of a plantser, sponsor, whatever it is. You've got to have some idea where
Right.
you're going. But still, when I write a story, I don't really know where I'm going. I don't know what's going to come out of the characters' mouths. I don't know really what the next scene is. I might kind of have a rough idea what the end point is,
Hmm.
but there's a lot of distance to cover between the beginning and the end.
Yeah.
And that's my job is to figure out how to get there and make it the best it can be without worrying about other than knowing that, hey, my audience, my readers tend to really like it when I talk about X,
Hmm.
firearms or ammunition or ballistics, or maybe they hate it. It's funny, sometimes I get some of the negative reviews or the less positive reviews that I've gotten back talk about the acronyms in my story and the use of acronyms.
Hmm.
Well, I don't even realize I'm using them because it's just part of it's like
They're your vernacular.
it's part
So
of the vernacular.
yeah.
But it's good to know because as I'm writing my stories now, I'm more conscious of if I'm going to say something, is someone I have to make it more clear. And I always try to be clear, but
Yeah.
clearly people were still stumbling on many acronyms. And one
Right.
of these days I'll have a focus group telling me what they're referring to because I still don't know. But I try to be better at giving the audience a better flavor. If I'm going to use an acronym or if I'm going to refer to an agency or going to refer to a tactic or a weapon or whatever
Hmm.
it is, I try to be a little more, I'm not going to spell it out like it's not footnoted on the bottom of the page, but I try to be better
Right.
at painting a better picture.
Well, and let's
That's
talk
my
about
job.
that, about painting the different picture. So, Perfect Shot's been out for a little over a year, or right around the year mark.
Under
A little under.
last
Okay.
year, the 23rd of November, so just
November.
under
Okay.
a year. Yeah,
Okay. And Out in the Cold's coming out November 12th.
correct.
November 12th. Okay. Um, what was that like to come out with the debut? There we go. Show that book. Yes. Um, what was it like to come out with the debut and then knowing you had to, because again, you have your whole life to write perfect shot, really. You're
Totally.
blast into the publishing world. You get one shot. Well, now you have a shorter period of time to
Yeah.
deliver book two, and you're under contract. So how was that for you
It was
as a
miserable.
pantser?
It was miserable. It was
Miserable.
miserable. I mean, I don't know how many, I talked to so many writers, commiserating with writers about how awful it was writing book two. And I mean, try not to whine, but saying, did you have the same experience?
Yeah.
And I would say most authors would say that the hardest book they had to write was the second one they did
Second.
under contract.
Yeah.
Because as you said, the first one, you've had your whole life to work on that one, and
Right.
really very few time constraints, except maybe the ones you put on yourself.
Sure.
And then suddenly you've got a book deal and it's got to be delivered by a specific date.
Hmm.
And you're thinking, oh, I have plenty of time. But then you get sucked into the whole world of marketing the book and admiring your book in the public or doing whatever you do other than writing.
Right.
It's really are. There's a lot of things that suck away your attention now that the first book's out there.
Hmm.
So you can be forgiven to a point, but man, the story, I actually threw away probably 60 or 80 pages of the beginning
Hmm.
because I tried to become more of a plotter.
Okay.
And someone had suggested to me, I won't say his name, Simon Gervais, that I should adopt more of a plotting, and he's right, and I've adopted it,
Right.
but I did it wrong.
Hmm.
So I tried to outline a story a little more, but it ended up being that I was forcing the story into a
Okay.
direction it shouldn't be going.
You felt like
And
it killed your
but
creativity?
story as an arc. Hmm?
Do you feel like it killed like creativity of not being able to just like sit down and go, "Hey, where am I going tonight?"
Yeah, it only killed it somewhat killed the creativity, but what it did is it took me into a different direction that made it feel, without getting into what the first plot was and where
Yeah.
it was going, um, it was feeling, because of the research and the plotting I was doing to the research I had done, it began to feel like more like a Michael Crichton
Okay. Gotcha.
medical mystery or science type mystery,
Hmm.
which is fine if that's the genre, but
Right.
that was not the genre of the first book. And as I'm 60, 80 pages or more into it, I realized this is not going to go well. Like now
Hmm.
I'm in trouble.
Now you're in trouble. Yeah.
And I had to throw out 60 or 80 pages and rewrite those pages and I become attached to certain locations that I was using in the story.
Sure.
And another important lesson in publishing is throw out your darlings.
Hmm.
Don't be afraid to throw out those darlings,
Kill
because
your darlings,
kill
even.
your darlings. Actually,
Yeah.
exactly right. Kill your darlings
Yeah.
because, yeah, sure, Monaco is a lovely place to write about and set a scene in, and it was going great, but it had nothing to do with where the story should have been going.
Right.
And it's sort of everything moved in that direction. Suddenly we're in Monaco and I'm stuck. And
Hmm.
why am I stuck? And it's because the story over here was not the right story. And
Right.
Monaco was a set piece
Hmm.
that I wanted, but didn't evolve
Right.
naturally, organically, whatever you want to call it. So,
Hmm.
lesson learned. So I had to throw that out, start that all again. And I'm very happy with where the story went once I kind of got on the right track. But taught me a lot of valuable lessons about my own style of writing and what I
Sure.
have to do to serve my own needs, or the way I write.
And remind me, because I know obviously I see your posts and stuff. So you did a lot of travel for book research, and was that book two or book one?
Both.
Both.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Book one, two, and three. So yeah, I
Okay.
did. Book one largely takes place in Arnhem, in the Netherlands,
Okay.
The Hague in the Netherlands, London, England. A lot of it is set there, Paris. So I've been to
Hmm.
all those places.
Yeah.
And then on that same trip, I had been to the south of France,
Okay.
Monaco, Nice, that whole area, which helped me do the background for book two.
Hmm.
And the following year, Lynn and I went to visit our daughter who lives in London, went back to Actually, we went to Portugal because I was forced to go somewhere where there was warmth before I would be allowed to take my wife to Helsinki, which was not warmth.
Good for Lynn. Good for
Which,
Lynn.
yeah, which is largely where book two is set around. If a
Yeah.
lot of the book takes place in Helsinki, but it very much involves Finland and
Okay.
that area, the Baltic
Hmm.
states, the Baltic Sea. So yeah, so a lot of the research had been done there. And book three, without I won't give too much away, but book three is a book that takes place in Africa.
Okay.
So Lynn and I had done
I remember those pictures. So
yeah,
yeah.
We did a safari in Tanzania,
Hmm.
and I very much rely on the research and the photography and the experiences I had in Tanzania
Hmm.
help set the stage for what happens in book three.
Got
But
a
yeah, I
little,
mean, travel is fantastic. Google Earth will get you so far.
yeah.
But
I
if
was
you're
just,
writing, if you're writing an international thriller, especially, you've got to try if you can. I mean, not everybody can.
yeah,
I've been fortunate. You got to try if you can to get there.
right.
I mean, so
I'm heading out in about a month. My mom's never gone international. So her mother grew up in Nova Scotia. So we are Canadian
I
cousins, I
didn't know
guess,
that. I
directly.
didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't gone up in years. I need to go up there. One of my cousins John Wayne came down last year, loved my books and I saw him for Thanksgiving last year, our US American Thanksgiving. And he's like, you got to come back. So one of these days I'm going to get back up there. But she's only been, grew up in the US and gone to Canada. She just turned 71 and earlier this year she's been wanting to go to Ireland for years. And so I call her, I don't know, March or April, whatever. I go, hey, mom, Thanksgiving. Because every other Thanksgiving, I don't have my kids for like a full week. And I kind of made a deal with myself several years ago on that kidless Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
You're not just going to go hang out with friends and family, who my friends and family are amazing. You're going to leave the country and you're going to go to a different country. That was the rule I set for myself. So fast forward calling my mom back in the spring and I'm like, hey, Thanksgiving. She goes, oh, are you coming home? And I was just like, no, we're going to Ireland. She goes, us? What? I was like, you want to go to Ireland? I'll pay. Amazingly, mom wanted to go to Ireland. Hey, what do you know?
Nice.
So I think we're gonna do. I've already been to England multiple times, but I think we're gonna actually start in London and then probably go up to Scotland for a
Yeah.
brief little visit because I got an idea for a story and I need to go to Edinburgh. So for next year's book, and then but I got a bigger scene set in Dublin or in Ireland, so we'll then go into Dublin in Ireland for several days and. Then I can knock that part of the book out. Hey mom, just chill for a little bit. I need to go sit here and do some research.
Oh, very
Um,
cool. Yeah.
but yeah, it's gonna be but just like to what you're saying, and if I could ever get in a position where I don't have to have a corporate job and I can just write full time and have that luxury, which I know it is a luxury, but that blessing of being able to just
Mhm.
travel and kind of like I think like what Mark Graney's done over the years and Josh Hood and different places or different
Brad
writers
Taylor.
of
Yeah.
figure out where you want to put your story and then go there and get
Yeah.
eyes on the ground. Because I agree with you. Google Earth is super amazing, but it's different when you can smell it. It's different when
Yeah.
you can taste it and you can touch
Yeah.
it. And I think the readers pick up on that because
Oh,
readers
yeah.
are extremely discerning when it comes to what we write.
I had a friend of mine tell me that in book one, I count the number, I list or I mention the number of steps to get up into Lloyd's Bank in London.
Better be right.
And he said he paused right there. He went to Google Earth. He called up the image because I used an actual location in London
Right.
along Threadneedle Street. And he counted the steps, and sure enough, there were 7 steps. And he says, "You're lucky there were 7 steps." I said, "Yeah, I know." But yeah, I mean, I think it's, research is important. And, it's fun because in Perfect Shot In and Out in the Cold, I use real locations. For the most part, in Perfect Shot, there's more or less one place I invent or modify a little bit for the story.
Mhm.
Um, like I create an alley where there's no alley, you know. But sometimes you got to do that. But
Right.
other than that, when I mention a pub, St. Stephen's Tavern in London, you can walk into St. Stephen's Tavern in London, where I said it is, and
Hmm.
look around, and hopefully I've described it as it is, because I do that because Nelson DeMille did that for me,
Hmm.
right? And Tom
Right.
Clancy did that. And maybe not Tom Clancy so much, but I'll go back to Nelson DeMille. When Nelson would set a scene, and God rest his soul, because he was one
Hmm.
of my all-time favorite authors and
Yeah.
taught so much about writing. And when he would set a scene, it just felt like you were there. And
Hmm.
I remember I took the ferry from Orient Point on Long Island over to New London, Connecticut, right past Plum Island,
Hmm.
because that's how Nelson DeMille described it to me.
Right.
And I did a motorcycle trip. It was a 2006 or so. I did a 9/11 memorial ride from Boston to Ground Zero in New York.
Hmm.
It was like 1,000 or 2,000 motorcycles. But when we got to Ground Zero, we kind of all split up, and I was by myself. And I decided my way home was up through to the end of Long, right up Long Island, take that
Hmm.
ferry, wave at Plum Island, and then come home. And it was so
What's
cool
hat tip to
because,
Nelson? So
yeah, tip to Nelson for sure, because
yeah,
that's what he showed me in his writing. And
right.
so even then, even though I wasn't back in a serious writing then, I
Hmm.
had that reader bug, that writer bug, that, truth to reality or truth to fidelity, high fidelity writing. And
Hmm.
I remember that moment. I'll never forget that moment of passing Plum Island. It's so kind of silly on the one hand, but it was just a major point in my journey and evolution as someone becoming a writer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those things are powerful. I had my kids in DC. We actually went twice this year. My son got sick during a spring break trip, and so we had to cut the trip short. We were supposed to have a personal tour of the Capitol. So we were going back to see family in Connecticut in July, and I set up a couple days in DC, which the kids grumbled about. We're going back there, and I'm like, hey, you're you're still mine to I force you where to go now until you're an adult. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
But they actually both loved it because I was able to talk to my congressman and I was able to get a I say private tour, but it was a
yeah,
personal one-on-one tour through the Capitol. Where do you want to the congressional aide was like, "Where do you want to go? I'll show you whatever I can." And he was gonna get us onto the speaker platform. But we were there the day that everyone was in session and they were actually grilling the director of the Secret Service after the Trump assassination attempt.
the
So
Butler
that
Farm.
place was lit up. It was a cool time to go in a way, but they were just about to have some protests a couple days
Yeah,
later as well. But one of the things that was there that I wanted to see, and the kids again grumbled, I made them go into one of the Senate office buildings because there in the building is I think it's on the second floor. It's where JFK, second or third floor. I'm drawing a blank now. It's where JFK's office was when he was a senator, before he became president. And there's a plaque there. And in my latest breach of trust, that's the office that my fictional senator gets because he's so enamored with
oh, cool.
JFK. That's the office. So I think it's a conference room now, honestly, but there's still a plaque there. Man, I had to go up and touch that plaque and I had to get a
Yeah,
picture next to it because I was just like, and I said to the kids, and the kids are both kind of like, oh yeah, Dad, that's cool. And I'm like, again, for as a writer, it's one of those things where it's like you put part of yourself in every book.
yeah,
So when you get those little Easter eggs in there that you get a smile out of, that's a pretty
yeah.
amazing experience.
Is that Senate building you're talking about, the one across from the Supreme Court?
Yes, I think it's the Clay Hill,
Yeah,
Clay Hill or Russell.
I'm
It
drawing
might
a
be the
blank on the
Russell.
name.
Yeah, it might
I
be
should know
it's
it
either
because I
the
used it
Russell or
in,
Clay Hill.
I used one of those buildings in my book, and I'm drawing a blank on the official name of the building. But
So did I, and I can't remember. And I just read the thing like 3 months ago.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that's terrible.
I'm
Anyway,
on to the next one, unfortunately. So now my world's in a
exactly.
totally different book that comes out soon, and then I got another one to come out next year. So I'm always terribly behind. I always have these
Yeah,
grand aspirations I'll be done by November 1st, and then October 30th comes, and I'm like, I freaking got 2 more weeks of writing to get to that. What am I thinking?
yeah, exactly, exactly.
So talk about Out in the Cold. Out in the Cold, out November 12th. So tell us about the story and how it came about, and get the readers to get out here and get a copy here on the 12th.
Yeah, so out in the cold is a story. It's sort of the continuing drama of Special Agent Alexander Martel,
Hmm.
where she is now a contract employee of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Okay.
And it starts off in a lovely luxury mega yacht on the Mediterranean at a party, and things go awry at the party, and Alex gets to save the day, shall we say. So there's some really neat, it spends a lot of pages. I love high action beginnings. So
Mhm.
Out in the Cold spends a lot of time with a boat chase that takes off from the mega yacht, leads to a boat chase and a Bombardier Sea-Doo chase on the Med. So there's a good night chase scene on the Med. But the really central question is, who is messing with Finland?
Okay.
Someone has been creating havoc in Finland over the course of about a year. It's essentially a sabotage campaign. Infrastructure is being sabotaged. Power grids are being knocked out. Hospitals are being tampered with. Ransomware is running amok.
Hmm.
Who is doing this? Suspicion, of course, points at the GRU and the Russians as trying to get back at the West, really for anything.
Hmm.
Um, So as a result, the West is getting a little upset, and America is being pulled back towards a build-up to war.
Hmm.
And Alex ends up back in Washington, and she's in the Situation Room with the president and some others, and they're talking about ramping up additional resources in the Baltic Sea and countering moves by the Russians they're building up their own resources in Western Russia.
Hmm.
So really, it's about who is messing with Finland and why.
Hmm.
So Alex, as this buildup is going on in the background, Alex is, for one reason or another, pulled in a slightly different direction, but then pulled back towards what's actually going on in Finland. So her job is to unravel the mystery a little bit and convince people that something is going on that may or may not be as it appears, but that they better pay attention to before, everybody reaches a point of no return. So that's kind of the short synopsis.
Love it.
What I didn't mention was I was really lucky because this boat scene that happens on the Med, I have a favorite boat called the Axopar boat, which is made in Finland.
Okay.
So I was able to arrange with a manufacturer to get on the boat in Finland on the Baltic Sea. They took me for a ride out in the Baltic
Oh,
Sea on this high-speed boat that I use in my story. So that was pretty cool. But so yeah, it starts off with a high-speed chase on the boat on the Mediterranean, and there's some fun sequences both in at home in DC and Virginia and Arlington, as well as up in Finland. There's some fun stuff going on up there. But ultimately, it's up to Alex and company to save the day again.
now did you say there was a Sea-Doo tie-in too as well?
There is
And
a Sea-Doo tie-in.
and did you make Lynn do that scene? Did you have her get on the Sea-Doo and recreate this thing?
As a matter of fact,
I
years
hope.
ago, yeah, I wish I could have recreated that scene, but years ago, Lynn and I rode my Harley from here in Toronto down to Key West.
Okay.
And while we were in Key West, we went out on a Sea-Doo tour of Key West.
Sure.
And Lynn wanted to come on my CD, and I said, "No, man, get your own."
Get
Like,
your
so I convinced her to take another Sea-Doo, which she did and loved.
yeah.
So a Sea-Doo had to make it. I'd love to have a Sea-Doo. So I'm living vicariously through
Yeah.
Alex. She's on this high performance Sea-Doo, and I picture that's what I was doing in Key West. I was just practicing for this moment, but
That's awesome. Again, you don't know how those, and that's what I always try to tell people. And I get financial resources. I totally
sure.
trust me. That's a lot of my life where I've been restricted on what I can do. But it's like if you can find ways to do something, especially as a
Yeah,
writer, because the more hands-on you can do, and just in general in life, if you're not a writer, man, get out. And I obviously I post a lot of pictures, I post a lot of videos. Some people give me a lot of like, hey, I love it. I'm sure I get a couple people who are like, dude, enough. But it's
yeah,
like part of it I want to do it to people is to show what's out there. And it's like, man, I know for myself, and I don't look at it as I've wasted my life because I hate to look at life as a waste. But I know some of the time I've utilized as I was younger, I didn't utilize it very well. So it's a finite thing. It's the only thing you'll never get back in life for sure, is you're never going
yeah,
to get time back. So I try to be kind of, conscientious going forward of what I'm going to do with it. And I got a lot of experiences I'd like to be able to do, and I try to get other people to say, hey, maybe get off the couch, maybe go out. The Aurora Borealis was out here a
right.
couple of weeks ago, and I told my kids, come on. Of course, you couldn't see it very well, but you could catch it with the camera. So I got a couple pictures, and it doesn't look that great, but it was just kind of like that's still something you don't see in Western North Carolina very often, guys. So
Yeah.
um, get out
You
and
know,
explore.
and exactly. And out of that, if you can't afford to go to targeted research trips around the world, then wherever you go, travel with intent,
Yes.
right? Travel with intention. So absorb, get off your camera for a minute or off your phone for a minute and look around. And as you mentioned earlier, smell the smells,
Yeah.
see the sights, look at the lights, look at the color, take
Right.
notes if you
Take
have
notes.
to, because you never know if one day you want to refer to that place again and now you're not there. What
Right.
did it smell like? Did you smell I'm thinking of, I remember when we were in Tanzania,
Hmm.
I wasn't planning on writing a book about Tanzania. It was the furthest thing from my mind,
Hmm.
but I remember the smell of the city of Arusha. It was
Okay.
smoke and coffee and other smells that I have no idea what
Mm.
they were. Good smells, not bad smells, but just aromas and fragrances that I had never smelled anywhere else.
Hmm.
And I filed those away, and now I can write about them.
Yeah.
I still don't really know what they are, but I remember what it reminded me of, and I
Right.
can. So, the bottom line is don't sleep through life, as you were saying, right?
Yeah.
Go through life with intention. And if you get a moment, write something down so that when you do a story later on, if that's what you're going to do,
Hmm.
you can refer to your journal or whatever you want to call it and go, oh, yeah, I remember that aspect that so I'll give you an example. Lynn and I travel by motorcycle a lot.
All
And
over the place.
oh, yeah, it's cross country.
Yeah.
It's Rocky Mountains,
Right.
it's Key West, it's wherever. And Lynn keeps a daily journal, a
Mm.
daily log of what our mileage was, what the weather was, what the main sites we saw were, and any other impressions she had. And they're just snippets.
Hmm.
But I tell you, when we go through that journal years later,
Yeah.
we've forgotten 90% of what we saw or experienced.
Hmm.
So we really get to relive it. And then because of course those little things will trigger memories and we'll go, "Oh yeah, do you remember this or
Yep.
that?" So I mean, I'm not a journaler. I'm too lazy to do that, but the fact that she
You're
does it,
not you're not lazy. I'll maybe to do that. Keep that to do that on there, but you're definitely not
yeah.
lazy.
But yeah, it's something for sure. It's to travel with your eyes open and your head and heart open, and to
Yeah.
learn a lot and absorb a lot and be richer. If you're, I mean, if you're writing, your writing's going to be richer for it, and if not, you're richer for it, and that's hard to complain about.
Yeah. Well, there's I keep hammering over to my kids over the years, but there's so much to see and so much to explore. And especially now, and I'm guilty of it. People say, well, you're on social media, you do that. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
so easy to have your device
yeah,
be kind of your vision of the world.
yeah,
And especially now, I can see it with my kids or my niece and my nephew. It's like, and I get on them, be like, put your phone down, stop
yeah,
watching shorts, stop doing that. And of course, they'll always be like, Dad, you're on your phone. It's like, yeah, I'm on my phone for 2 minutes. I post something or I reply to someone's thing, and then I do put it down.
yeah,
And I try not to look at it for a few hours. I was like, I don't sit there all day long and just looking at it. And I still need to use it less. I said, but there's so much to see. And I was St. Augustine. The world is a book, and those that don't travel read only one page.
right, yeah,
And that's one of my like quotes I always go back to over the years. And I know some people do not like to travel. Do not, they're comfortable in their plot of earth, and that's what makes them happy. And for those people, God bless them. Stay
hmm,
there. For me, if I could spend 1 week every month on the road going to a different country or a different place, I'd be a pig in crap. I'd be
yeah,
totally cool with that. And that might get old, but I'd
yeah,
like it to try to get old. I'd like that experience to try to get old. So follow what it is you're interested in. And we limit ourselves. So you never know by doing something what door that's going to open.
yeah, totally.
So,
And hard, not to get preachy, but it's hard to hate people who you've met.
yeah,
And that's the same for cultures,
absolutely.
languages, places, for sure. I mean, there are places I thought I wouldn't like,
Yeah.
wouldn't want to visit, wouldn't like the people, whatever. And then was amazed and surprised by how much I loved wherever I was.
Hmm.
The people, the culture, the food, whatever it is. It's hard to hate something that you come to know.
Yeah,
And the world needs a lot more of less hate.
it does.
So if travel is what gets you there, so be it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I couldn't say it better myself for sure. So, well, I think you'd agree with me that life is like a book. You've got a first page, you get a last page. None of us, probably for a good reason, know how many pages we're going to have. But Steve, you're a writer, so I know you can write. So, what would you want to have written on that last page if you get to write it? What do you want that last page to say?
Oh man, as in an epitaph, as in
As in any way you take that question, what do you want your last page to say? I get some very interesting answers with this.
what would I like my last page to say? Geez, in the form of a paragraph or something else.
In the form of
Uh,
whatever you say.
all right, so I'm gonna do it as an epitaph.
Okay.
Um, no, I have no idea. There's an old saying, I don't want to limp across the finish line,
Yeah.
um, and just meet the maker, uh, finish and sort of tired and
Hmm.
ready for sleep.
Right.
I want to come screeching across that finish line with on the Harley, pipes screaming, rubber burning, leather jacket on, and say, "Hey, buddy, I'm here.
I
Let
made
the
it.
party begin." You know, something along those lines. I mean, life is a ride. Life is a great joy. Um, I try to experience and live every minute. And
Hmm.
you're only as young as you feel, or
Hmm.
as old as you feel. And I'm an
Right.
old guy who feels quite young, and that's just how I believe life should be. Is forget about your chronological number. Just live your dream and keep finding more dreams to live. And that's what I believe in.
I love the answer. So I definitely have heard over the years people tell me personally, they'll be like, man, you're always on the go. You're always doing something. Do you sleep? And yeah, I do sleep. I mean, I'm not a vampire. But I constantly go back to a Bon Jovi line that I had heard years ago: live while you're alive,
Yeah,
sleep when you're dead. I don't necessarily believe that's how it works, but I try to view that mantra as saying, I'm going to live life and I'm going to milk every ounce of enjoyment and misery sometimes out of it
yeah.
that I can get, because I don't know when it's going to stop. And I
You
don't
never
know,
know.
I don't know what's going to get thrown at me. I know what's been thrown at me so far. I don't know what's going to come in the future. And that's a good thing. That's a
Well, I
good
was
thing.
I was a paramedic for more than 30 years, and I can tell you most of the people who I responded to who are no longer with us,
Hmm.
they had no idea. I mean, for the most part, I mean, certain people in rare circumstances knew, but
Sure.
for the most part, they didn't know that was the last drive they were going to take, or the
Right.
last walk they were going to take, or the last time they said goodbye or hello to their family member, or, there's stuff happens. This is
Yeah.
a world, it's unpredictable. We're only human. We're very frail when compared to the forces around us.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, you got to live life milk it for all it's worth, because it's the only one you have. And once it's gone, it's gone.
Absolutely. So I was, like I mentioned earlier, I was at Yosemite and it was my sixth visit there. And one of my IT guy, my company out there, he always gives me a hard time because he's always like, "Man, you always go back to Yosemite. There's so many and I've seen other places around. It's not that Yosemite's the only place I go, but I keep going back to that same spot." And he's always like, just needles me a little bit and says, "Dude, you need to go see such and such." And I'm like, "That's cool." I said, "But you know what? I found a place in the world, and it's not the only place I'm going to go if I have any say in it, but it's the place that, and a couple of my friends have described it to me, that's your happy place." And for
Exactly.
me, when I'm there, I do feel alive when I'm home, absolutely, but I feel a little different version of being alive there. It's like something awakens in me and it just recharges me. And and then it also makes me go normally, okay, how can I get back here next year? How can I see
Yeah.
this again? Because I don't think I think I could go there every I was the place we stayed this trip. I was walking around the development one morning and I'm like, how can I afford a place here? How can I buy a house in this development? The true answer is I need the Netflix seven-figure deal probably to happen, which is probably not super likely,
Eight
but
figure deal, 8 figure deal.
yeah. But I know people that have got the deal. I know
Yeah.
a couple of them,
Yeah.
only a couple, but I do
Yeah.
know them by name.
Yeah.
Um, Again, you don't know what's going to happen in life. So play hard, work hard, and whatever happens, happens.
For sure. Well said.
Where can folks go out and get a copy of Out in the Cold?
So fortunately, Out in the Cold is available for pre-order now everywhere. So you can go online to your favorite indie bookseller, or Amazon, or Indigo if you're in Canada, or really anywhere where
Hmm.
you buy books. Pre-order it now. It goes up for sale in hardcover, trade paperback in Canada, in international version, audiobook, and ebook, all on November 12th.
12th. Okay.
So you can pre-order all of those formats today, or go out and pick it up in the store when it comes when it's published. But
Yeah. I think
yeah,
this will probably air on the 11th. So people can
fantastic.
probably then go tomorrow and they can do that if they haven't already pre-ordered or they don't want to pre-order on the 11th and they want to run down the store on the 12th. They'll
Sounds
be able
good.
to get it.
That
Absolutely.
works for me too.
Steve, thanks for coming on. Hopefully our paths will cross. I won't be on a motorcycle, but you can pull over. You and Lynn can stop by and see me, or we can meet up somewhere one of these days.
Sounds good. Congratulations on all your success with your books and your upcoming projects, Eric. And you've been a real go-getter and inspiration for so many. So to the point now you have your own imprint, buddy. So congratulations.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that.